In our last section, I talked about how Enlightenment thinkers put their hopes in enlightened despots, and largely their hopes were dashed. In some cases, it was because the rulers didn't really put in place enlightened rule. For all of their attraction to the thinkers of the Enlightenment, a number of them undertook policies that undercut their commitment as far as the enlightened thinkers, the philosophers, were concerned, to true enlightened governance. Frederick the Great was still committed to using his army. Catherine still crushed a peasant serf uprising during her reign. Joseph II, for all of his far-reaching reforms, most of them were undone after his death. But the real telling end of any hope in the trust of these enlightened despots was the partition of Poland. The partition of Poland was a country in between these three large empires of these enlightened despots. And during this period of the Enlightenment, rather than being enlightened, rather than showing the fraternal community of nations, each of these rulers looked to partition Poland and take off sections of it for themselves, without regard for the history or the people of Poland. Each partition, there were three, carved off large sections of Polish land and territory. And you can see that each of these partitions involved these supposedly enlightened, or at least enlightened despot-led, countries. In the first partition, Poland lost nearly 30% of its territory and half its population. The second, undertaken as a way of squelching fear of revolutionary uprising, left Poland about a third of the size it once was. While the last partition in 1795 was a dissolution and destruction of Poland itself. The last partition eliminated Poland from the map. So, some kings claiming territory. What's the big deal? That's not that seemingly new in European history. But the partition of Poland is telling in that it proved, above all, that the enlightened despots couldn't be trusted. They might have been attracted to Enlightenment ideals, but they really weren't committed to the principles of the Enlightenment. So the question was for people who believed in the Enlightenment, well, where do we go from here? What do we do now? And in many ways, that's both the positive and the negative to the Enlightenment, because functionally the Enlightenment raised people's hopes. They raised people's expectations. And when they looked at the enlightened despots, their expectations, their hopes were not met with reality. They knew that the Enlightenment seemed to promise a bold new future, that if you dared to know, you would have a way forward. You would know how to put in place a real, peaceable, enlightened government. But if enlightened despots weren't capable of doing it, what now? Well, after this period, people started to contemplate, well, perhaps we shouldn't look at kings at all. Perhaps we shouldn't look at enlightened despots at all. Perhaps we should put our faith in bigger changes. Maybe we don't need a king at all. Maybe we should trust the people. And so it is fitting that our next lecture is a contemplation of that pushback against those kings, the rising of the people, which is known as the French Revolution.